With all the filmmaking equipment available out there, if you're starting a film career, it may feel a little prohibitively expensive. With cameras and lenses and lights and sound equipment and drones and computers and tripods and gimbals and YouTubers showing off their newest equipment and doing reviews and companies announcing surprise releases. You might wonder as you start your filmmaking career, what do I actually need?
And the truth is, not a lot. Having a RED camera or Cooke Cine Prime lenses will not bring clients to you. My first ever client was an automotive repair management company, and I was making software tutorial videos and occasionally shooting footage of their shops or doing corporate video interviews. They didn't know the difference between 1080p or 4K, or what frame rate I was shooting in, or what dynamic range was.
They just wanted it to look good.
And most people's first clients are small businesses looking for videos for their website or social channels, and their budgets aren't usually high.
But even with how expensive it is, it's actually cheaper than ever to at least start a career in this industry.
So here are a few pieces of equipment you can buy to start a filmmaking career that can make you money without spending all of yours.
The first is a used camera. Truthfully, almost any camera will do, especially when you're starting with small clients. Cameras also lose their value incredibly quickly. Every year, companies like Canon and Sony are pumping out newer cameras that make their older models obsolete. Here's a little story about camera obsolescence.
In November of 2008, I was an assistant on a comedy rock and roll vampire film called Suck. It was shot in Toronto, and it was the first Canadian film shot on the Red 1. I also met Alice Cooper. It was pretty cool. At the time, Red was blowing up. They made a digital camera that shot 4K.
Nowadays, that's not exactly noteworthy, but it was a big deal in 2008. It was, quote, the closest thing to shooting on film since shooting on film, according to Filmmaker magazine. At the time of release, it cost $17,000 just for the body, and it weighed about the same as a small car.
In researching for this video, I found a No Film School article from 2012 about how Red was selling their Red 1s for $4,000, quoting, "It's capable of an astounding 4.5K for 4K.
In less than 5 years, the Red 1 went from being one of the most amazing cinema camera innovations to basically being given away by the company.
And that takes us to a film I made in November 2013. 5 years after I worked on Suck, I shot my thesis film, Robbing Blind, on the Red 1 that my college owned. By that point, I would classify it as being a buggy mess or a glorified paperweight. And now, in 2021, I own a camera that shoots 6K RAW, and it only cost me $2,000.
So basically the moral of the story is, don't go out and buy a brand new camera when you're starting out, because it might be worthless in 5 years.
Which brings me to my Canon EOS Rebel T2i. I bought it in 2012 used, and while I don't use it much anymore, it's still a handy little thing. Recently I've shot time lapses on it for stock footage and for clients, and used it as a behind the scenes camera on some projects. A camera like this is a great starter, even today. You can buy used DSLRs or mirrorless cameras like this with a stock lens for maybe a couple $100. Yeah, its dynamic range isn't great, and it's not terrific in low light, especially if you compare it to a low light beast like the Sony a7S II. But it still shoots raw CR2 photos and shoots 1080p video at 24 frames per second, and even majority of my commercial clients are still only outputting in 1080p. If you can master something like this, then you can take those skills to a bigger, better camera later. Lenses can be expensive, but if you want a decent one without breaking the bank, then I'd recommend this bad boy, or one of its alternatives. This is a Canon full-frame 50mm f1.8, also known as the Nifty 50. Mine's an older one with a plastic mount. I think the newer ones are metal, so they're a little more durable. Canons will run $125 or so. Yongnuo has an off-brand one you can get for $50 or $75. Sony has an E-mount version that's closer to $250 because Sony lenses are just more expensive. But it opens up to f1.8, so it works nicely in low light. It's also full frame, so it'll work on full frame and APS-C sensors. And best of all, it's cheap. Here it is side by side with my $500 Rokinon Cine DS T1.5 50mm lens. I want to see if you can tell which is which, so let me know in the comments. And lens B is the Nifty 50. And here it is side by side with my $900 Tamron 28-75 f2.8 lens set to 50 mm. Again, I'll give you a few seconds to decide which is which. And just like last time, lens B is the nifty 50. Of course, there are some downsides, like the focus ring being kind of small and janky, but it's a little bit of a you get what you pay for situation. But if you want a cheap lens, this is one I definitely recommend. A lot of early filmmaking gigs will probably result in you shooting outside, which means you'll likely need a neutral density filter to cut down the light. You've probably heard this before, but ND filters are like sunglasses for your lens. They cut down the light to the sensor so you can shoot at lower f-stops, giving you a shallower depth of field in bright conditions. For the longest time, I only owned one with a thread size of 77mm, but some of my other lenses had wider filter threads, so I bought step-up and step-down rings to make it fit multiple lenses. This is a great budget way to make your ND filter go a little bit of a longer way. The one downside to step-up and step-down rings is they sometimes get screwed on a little too tight and can be tough to pull off. So I keep an elastic band in my bag to help give me a little more tension to unscrew them when they get stuck.
But this is a good demonstration as to why filmmaking equipment can be so expensive. Higher end gear is pricier because it's either more durable and meant to last, or it makes your workflow more efficient.
For example, my C300 Mark II has built-in ND filters. So with the click of a button, we can cut down the light, preventing us from needing to find and strap on an ND filter or step-up rings just to go shoot outside. Now, while you can shoot using available or natural light, which is sometimes the only option, you'll occasionally need lights. One of the biggest advantages to new technology, though, is LED lighting. It's made cinema lighting immensely cheaper than it's ever been. So I have these Aperture ALM9s. I have two of them, and I use them all the time. Whether they're little accent lights or backlight kickers, they can be taped to a wall or wedged just about anywhere. They're chargeable with USB, and they only cost $60. Then I have these Yongnuo light wands. I've used them on short films, commercials, corporate videos, interviews, and more. They're about $100 each, have RGB settings, can be daylight and tungsten. They're great. But they do require a battery, and they take NPF batteries, which are like half the price of the light itself. NPF batteries, though, are extremely versatile. They can be used in monitors, to power cameras, other lights, so it's not a bad investment to have a couple of these around. Now, tripods can be expensive. Proper cinema ones can cost thousands of dollars. I have a Manfrotto fluid head. It cost me about $500, but they take a good amount of abuse. They get brought out on location, they travel, so this is one thing I recommend spending at least a decent chunk of change on if you want it to last. Young filmmakers shoot a lot of handheld, both out of laziness or simply lack of experience. I know I was guilty of that back in the day. So I recommend using a tripod as much as possible, unless you can master handheld camera work. So I purchased this Benro Aero Travel tripod several years ago for about $220. It folds up pretty small, has traveled with me all around North America without breaking, has a ball head so it can be leveled out quickly on uneven ground, and can be converted into a monopod using the center column and one of the legs. Now that you have all this equipment to shoot footage with, you're going to want to edit it, and I recommend downloading Vinci Resolve. There is a studio version, but the base version is completely free and can handle 99% of whatever a beginning filmmaker might need. And you can always upgrade later if you decide you need something from the studio version. Their color grading software is industry standard, and their editing capabilities get closer to rivaling Premiere and Final Cut Pro with every release.
So if you learn Resolve, you can take those skills and apply them to almost any other editing software.
And if you want to learn more about color grading and DaVinci Resolve, I highly recommend you watch Kazi's YouTube channel. I've personally learned an insane amount about color grading from him. He's fantastic. Now, if you're starting out, all those things might sound expensive together, but it actually works out to less than $1,000, or just a teensy bit more than what I paid for the last lens I purchased.
So with less than $1,000 worth of equipment, you can now produce content that somebody will pay you for.